On the Irrawaddy, by G.A. Henty. Chapter 4. A Ruined Temple. After the officer left him, Stanley sat thinking for a long time. He himself inclined strongly toward the river, but he saw that, at present, the difficulties would be very great. The war boats were passing up and down, and bodies of troops were being carried down in large craft. In every village, the men he knew were assembling and drilling. Even in Ava he could see the difference in the population, the proportion of men to women having markedly decreased since his arrival. As to the journey by land, it appeared to him impossible. He was, too, altogether without money, and whether by water or land it would be necessary to go into the villages to buy provisions. Indeed, money would have been almost useless, for there was no coined money in Burma, payments being made in lead for small amounts or in silver for large ones, the quantity necessary being cut off from small sticks or bars or paid in filings. It seemed to him that the best thing would be to take to the forest for a time, and endeavour to subsist upon wild fruits, or, if these were not to be found there, to go out into the fields and orchards at night, and so manage to hold on for a few weeks. His friend told him that in the forests along the principal lines of route to the capital were many bad characters, persons who had committed crime or fled from justice. Some were cultivators who, having been unable to pay their taxes, had deserted their land and taken to the woods. All committed depredations, and traders coming into the town from the Shan states, or from the country where rubies and emeralds were found, always travelled in caravans for mutual protection. At times levies were called out, and many of these marauders were killed. Stanley then had hit upon nothing definite when the officer returned in the afternoon, and, in reply to the latter's question, he acknowledged at once that the only thing he could see was to take to the forest, until the active search for him had ceased. "You would find it difficult to maintain yourself. I have thought of a better way than that. I am acquainted with a Fungi who lives in a temple in a lonely spot 4 miles away. He is a good man, though somewhat strange in his habits, and I feel sure that, on my recommendation, he would take you in. There would be little chance of your being discovered there. You could not go dressed as you are, but must disguise yourself as a peasant, though it might be well to retain your present attire, which may be useful to you afterwards. I fear that you will fare badly with him in the way of food. There will be enough to eat, but it will be of the simplest. So that there is enough to keep life together, it matters little what it is. Then that is settled. Now, about making your escape from here. Your door is closely barred at night, and there is no window save those 4 little holes high up in the wall, which scarce a bird could get through." "Oh, I could cut through the thatch above," Stanley said, "if I had but something that I could stand upon to do so. There are some bamboos lying just at the bottom of the steps. With these and some cord I might make a sort of ladder, and should then be able to get at the thatch. I will bring you some cord tomorrow for that, and to let yourself down to the ground. Then I will arrange where to meet you, and will guide you out of town and take you to the priest. I will bring a disguise for you, and some stain for your body and arms, for as a peasant you would be naked to the waist. I can think of nothing better." "I thank you most heartily," Stanley said, "and trust that you may get into no trouble for the kindness that you have shown me." "Oh, there is no fear of that, my friend. No one will know that I have been away from the town. I am greatly afraid that this will be all that I shall be able to do for you, for I am told that I am to go down the river with the next batch of troops, which will start in 3 days. I have only been informed of it since I saw you this morning. Had it not been for you, I should have been glad, for it is in wartime only that one can obtain honour and promotion." "I am sorry that you are going, sir. I shall miss your kindness sorely, but I can understand your desire to go to the front. It's the same with us. When there is a war, every officer and soldier hopes that his regiment will be sent there. However, I shall see you again. Has Bandoola's army moved yet?" "No, nor do I think that it will do so. It's a long march down to Rangoon from Ramoo, and I believe that he will remain where he is until he sees how matters go at Rangoon. As soon as your people are driven out, he will be joined by a great army and will march to Dacca. There our troops from the north will join him, and then he will go to India, we think." "I fancy," Stanley said with a smile, "that if he waits until we are turned out from Rangoon, his stay at Ramoo will be a long one." The next day the officer brought several yards of strong cloth, such as was worn by the peasants, a piece of muslin to make the circular band that was worn by the lower class instead of a complete turban, and a lot of horsehair to be worn on the top of the head. "Now," he said, "strip to the waist and I will dye your body. I have dyes of 2 colours here, one for the skin and the other to draw lines on the face so as to make you look older, and with this I can also imitate tattoo marks on your chest and soldiers. Here is a long knife such as everyone wears, and here is the cord. As soon as it is getting dark you must carry up 2 of the bamboo poles, taking care that no one observes you do so. There is seldom anyone in the courtyard. I have had the knife sharpened, and it will cut through the thatch easily enough. When you get away, walk straight to the market that lies nearest to it. I'll be at its entrance. It will take you, I suppose, 2 hours to make your ladder and get out. You cannot begin until the guard closes your door. You tell me he never comes in." "No, he brings the last meal an hour before sunset. I generally sit on the top of the steps till he comes up to lock the door, which is about 9 o'clock, and I don't see him again until he unbars the door in the morning. I should not think that it will take as long as 2 hours to make the ladder and cut the thatch. At any rate, by 11 I ought to join you. I suppose the gates are open." "Oh, yes, they are never closed, though of course they would be if an enemy were near. There is no guard anywhere." After staining Stanley's skin, the officer waited a quarter of an hour for it to dry thoroughly, and then proceeded to draw lines on his face across the forehead and from the corners of his eyes, and then spent nearly an hour in executing rough tattoo marks on his body and arms. "This dye is very good, and will last for weeks before it begins to fade. I will bring with me another bottle tonight, so that you can at least re-dye your skin. Here is some wax. You must turn your hair up from the neck, and plaster it into its place with it. The turban will prevent anyone seeing how short the hair is. There is a little bottle of black dye, with which you had better colour it before fixing it with the wax." Stanley's hair had not been cut for some time before he had been captured by the Burmese, and in the 2 months that had since elapsed it had grown very long, and could therefore be turned up as the officer suggested. Putting on his usual garments, he sat at his place at the door of the cell until the guard brought up his evening meal. Having eaten this, he dyed his hair, and half an hour later turned it up, plastering it with wax, and tied a bit of fibre cord round where the turban would come. By this time it was getting dusk. He sat at the door at the top of the steps until he saw that the courtyard was deserted, the guard at the gate having gone outside to enjoy the coolness of the air. Then he ran down the steps, took 2 bamboo poles about 10 feet in length, and 2 short pieces of the same wood, no thicker than his finger, and hurrying up the steps with them, laid them down against the side of the room. Then he went to the steps again, and sat there until he saw the guard coming across to fasten his door. Then he went in, and, as soon as he heard the bars put up, began his preparations. First he lashed the short pieces across the ends of the 2 bamboos so as to keep them a foot apart. Then he put ratlines across, and soon had the ladder completed. He made up his clothes into a bundle, wrapped the rough cloth round his waist, adjusted the knot of horsehair on the top of his head, and fastened it there with wax. He wound the turban round below, and his disguise was complete. Fixing the ladder against the wall, he climbed it, and it was not long before he cut a hole through the thatch of sufficient size to pass out. The work had taken him longer than he had expected, for it had to be done in absolute darkness. However, he was sure that he was well within his time. Fastening the end of the rope to one of the bamboo rafters, he descended the ladder and picked up his bundle, then climbed up again, got halfway out the hole, and listened intently. Everything was quiet in the street, and in another minute he stood on the ground. When he turned into the principal street, there were still many people about. Sounds of music and singing came from the windows, for the Burmese are very fond of music, and often pass the whole night in playing and singing. There was no risk whatever of detection now, and he stepped briskly along until he came to the open space with its rows of little thatched huts. Here he paused for a minute, and the officer stepped out from behind a house and joined him. "I was not sure at first that it was you," he said. "Your disguise is excellent. You had better follow me now until we get beyond the busy streets." Keeping some 20 yards behind his guide, Stanley went on until, after nearly half an hour's walking, they passed through a gate in the city walls. He now closed up to the officer, and, after another half hour's walk across a cultivated country, they entered a forest. The ground now rose steadily, and after keeping on for about 2 miles, they emerged from the trees at the top of a hill. The space had been cleared of timber, but it was nearly covered with bushes and young trees. In the centre were the ruins of a temple that had evidently existed long before the Burmese dynasty occupied the country, and had been erected by some older race. It was roofless, the walls had in places fallen, and the ruins were covered with vegetation. The Burman ascended some broken steps, entered the temple, and crossed to one of the opposite corners. A dim light was burning in a small apartment which had been roofed with thatch. A man was lying, dressed, on a heap of leaves at one side. He started up as the officer entered. "Who is it who comes here at this hour?" he asked. "Thekin," the officer answered. "I am glad to see you," the Fungi said. "Whatever may bring you here, you have not fallen into trouble, I hope?" "In no way, good priest. I am starting in 2 days down the river to fight the barbarians. But before I go, I want you to do me a favour." The Fungi smiled. "Beyond naming you in my prayers, Thekin, there is but little that a hermit can do for any man." "Not so in this case," the officer said. "I have one here with me, who needs rest and concealment, I would rather that you did not ask who he is. He has done no crime, and yet he is in danger, and for a month maybe he needs a shelter. Will you give it to him for my sake?" "Assuredly I will," the priest said. "Your father was one of my dearest friends in the days when I dwelt in the city. I would gladly do all in my power for his son, and this is but a small thing that you ask. Let him enter." Stanley went in. The priest took down the little lamp from a shelf on which it stood, and held it near the lad's face. Then he turned with a smile to Theckin. "The painting is but clumsily done," he said, "though maybe it would pass without close examination. He is a stranger, and comes of a race unknown to me, but, as you said, it matters not to me who he is, sufficient that he is a friend of yours. He is welcome to a share of my shelter and my food, though the shelter is rough and the food somewhat scanty. Of late few, indeed, have sought me, for, as I hear, most of the men have gone down to the war." "I have brought you some food," the officer said, for Stanley had observed that he also carried a bundle, a larger one than his own. "Here is a supply of rice that will last for some time, and this, with your offerings, will suffice to keep things going. My friend is not, like you, bound by his religion not to take life, and I know that snakes are very plentiful round here." Snakes had formed a frequent article of his diet since he had been captured, and Stanley had lost the repugnance to them that he had at first felt, so the prospect of their forming the staple of his diet was not disagreeable to him. It would also afford him some employment to search for and kill them. "I shall be well content," he said, "with anything that I can get, and trust that I shall be no burden upon you." "You will assuredly be none," the priest replied. "Here must be at least 30 pounds of rice, which alone would keep 2 men alive for a month. As regards the snakes, though I may not kill them, I may eat them when killed, and indeed there are few things better. In truth, I should not be sorry to have some of the creatures out of the way, for they swarm around here so thickly that I have to pay great heed when I walk, lest I step upon them." "Have you been troubled with robbers of late, father?" Theckin asked. "Oh, they trouble me not at all," the priest said. "Men come sometimes. They may be robbers or they may not. I ask no questions. They sometimes bring fruit and other offerings, and I know that I need not fear them. I have nought to lose save my life, and he would be indeed an evil man who would dare to lift his finger against a priest, one who harms not anyone, and is ready to share what food he has with any man who comes to him hungry." "Well, father, I will say goodbye. I must be back to the city before men are about, as I would not that my absence should be discovered." "Peace be with you, my son. May you come back safe from the wars. My prayers will be said for you night and morning. Be in no uneasiness as to your friend. If any should ask me about my companion, I shall reply that he is one who has undertaken to rid me of some of the snakes who dispute the possession of this place with me." Theckin motioned to Stanley to come outside the hut with him, and when he did so, handed to him a small but heavy bag. "This is lead," Theckin said. "You will need it when you start on your journey down the country. There are 8 pounds of it, and from what you have seen in the market you will know how much food you can get for a small amount of lead. I would that I could do more for you and assist your flight." "You have done much indeed," Stanley said, "very much, and should I regain my friends I will endeavour to do as much by one of your countrymen for your sake. I hope that when the war is over I may meet you again." "I hope so also," the Burmese said warmly. "I cannot but think that you will succeed in getting away." "My son," the old priest said when Stanley returned to his cell, "I am going to my prayers. I always rise at this hour and pray till morning, therefore you may as well lay yourself down on these leaves. There is another cell like this in the opposite corner of the temple. In the morning you can cut boughs and roof it like this, and make your bed there. There is no room for another here, and it will doubtless be more pleasant for you to have a place to yourself, where you can go and come as you like, for in the day women come up to consult me and ask for my prayers. But mind how you enter it for the first time, as, like as not, there will be snakes sheltering there." Stanley lay awake for a time, listening to the monotonous voice of the priest as he repeated his prayers, but his senses soon wandered, and he slept soundly till daybreak. His first step was to cut a stout stick, and he then proceeded to the other cell, which was partially blocked up with stone from the fallen roof. It took him 2 hours to carry this stuff out, and he killed no less than 9 snakes that he disturbed in his work. The prospect of sleeping in a place so frequented was not a pleasant one, especially as the cell had no door to it, and he resolved at once to erect some sort of bed place where he might be beyond their reach. For this purpose he cut 2 poles, each 3 or 4 inches longer than the cell. One end of each he sharpened and drove in between the interstices of the stone, at a distance of some 2.5 feet apart, and 4 feet from the ground. The other ends he hammered with a heavy stone against the opposite wall, until they would go down no further. Then he split up some more wood in lashed strips almost touching each other, underneath the 2 poles, by the aid of some strong creepers. Then he filled up the bed place between the poles with dry leaves. On one end of the bed was some inches higher than the other. This was immaterial, and he felt satisfied that even the craftiest snake could not reach him. As to the roof, he was by no means particular about it. In this part of Burma the rainfall is very small, the inundations being the effect of heavy rains in the distant hill country, which, as they come down, raise the level of the rivers in some cases as much as 18 feet, and overflow the low-lying country. Before beginning to construct the bed, he had carried the snakes into the fongee, after first cutting off their heads, which, as he knew, the Burmans never touch. "This is good indeed, my son," the priest said. "Here we have our breakfast and dinner. I will boil some rice and fry 4 of them for breakfast." The bed was but half completed when he heard the priest sound a bell. It was doubtless used as a call to prayer. However, Stanley rightly conjectured that in this case it was a summons to a meal, and he was soon seated on the ground by the side of the priest. Little was said at breakfast, which Stanley enjoyed heartily. "So my friend Thikin is starting for the wars. What think you of it, my son? Shall we easily overpower these barbarians? We have never met them in war before, and doubtless their methods of fighting are different from ours." "Quite different. Their men are trained as soldiers. They act as one man, while the Burmese fight each for himself. Then they have cannon with them, which they can drag about quickly and use with great effect. Although they are few in comparison with the armies going down to attack them, the latter will find it very difficult work to turn them out of Rangoon." "Do you think that they will beat us, then?" "That I cannot say, but I should not be surprised if it were to prove so." "The Burmese have never been beaten yet," the priest said. "They have been victorious over all their enemies." "The Burmese are very brave," Stanley agreed, "but hitherto they have only fought against people less warlike than themselves. Now they have to deal with a nation that has made war a study, and which always keeps up a large army of men who are trained to fight, and who spend all their time in military exercises. It is not that they are stronger than the Burmese, for the Burmese are very strong men, but only that men who are trained to act together must, necessarily, possess a greater advantage over those who have had no such training, who simply take up arms for the occasion, and when the trouble is over return to their homes and lay them by, until called out to fight again. Besides, their weapons are better than yours, and they have many cannon, which by practice they can load and fire very quickly, and each of which, when the armies are near each other, can fire 50 or 60 bullets at once." "I have heard a strange story that the barbarians have a ship without sails, with a great chimney that pours out quantities of black smoke, and a wheel on each side, and, as the wheels move round, the vessel can go straight up the river against the tide, even if the wind is blowing strongly down." "It is true, Father. There are many such ships, but only 2 or 3 have made the long voyage across the stormy seas to India." "It is wonderful how these men can force fire to be their servant, and how it can make the wheels of the ship to move round." "I cannot explain it to you, Father. I have never seen one of these vessels, though I have heard of them." The priest said no more, but evidently fell into a profound meditation, and Stanley, getting quietly up, returned to his work. The priest came in just as he had completed his bed. "Oh, that is well," he said, looking at it approvingly. "I myself, although I know that until my time has come no creature can harm me, cannot resist a shudder when I hear one rustling amid the leaves of my bed, for they come in although some of my friends have had a door placed to exclude their entry at night. I wander but little from my cell, and always close the door after me, but they enter sometimes when I am meditating and forgetful of earthly matters, and the first I know of their presence is the rustling of the leaves in the bed at night. Here I, as strong in my faith as I should be, I would heed it not. I tell myself so, but my fear is stronger than my will, and I am forced to rise, turn up the leaves with a stick until I find them, and then I open the door and eject them with as much gentleness as may be." "I should get no sleep at all," Stanley said. "I don't think that even a door would make me feel any safer, for I might forget to shut it sometimes. Tomorrow, Father, I will wage war with them, and see if I cannot decrease their numbers considerably." Stanley's first task was to clear the bushes away from the court of the temple, and this, after several days' hard work, he carried out, although he soon saw that by so doing he would not diminish the number of the snakes, for the greater portion of the area was covered with blocks of fallen stone, among which the reptiles found an impenetrable shelter. The clearance effected, however, was so far useful that, while the creatures were before altogether hidden from sight by the bushes, they could now be killed when they came out to bask in the sun on the uncovered stones, and he could, every day, destroy a dozen or more without the slightest difficulty. 10 days after he had finished the work, he heard the sound of men's voices, and, peeping out, saw a Burmese officer with a party of 8 armed men going to the Fungi's cell. It was possible that they might have come on other business, but it was more probable that they had come in search of him. Some of the women who had come up to the hermit had seen him at work, and might have mentioned on their return that the priest had a man at work clearing away the bushes. The matter might have come to the ears of some officer anxious to distinguish himself, and the idea that this was the prisoner for whom a search was being made occurred to him. Stanley shrank back into his cell, took up the bundle of clothes that served as his pillow, got onto the bed, and standing on it was able to get his fingers on to the top of the wall. He hoisted himself up, made his way through the boughs of the roof, and dropped onto the ground outside. Then he went round by the back of the temple until he stood outside the priest's cell and could hear the voices within without difficulty. "Then you know nothing whatever of this man?" "Nothing whatever," the priest replied. "As I have told you, he came to me and asked for shelter. I gave him such poor assistance as I could, as I should give it to anyone who asked me. He has been no burden upon me, for he has killed enough snakes for my food and his own." "You know not of what part he is a native?" "Not at all. I asked him no questions. It was no business of mine." "Could you form any idea from his speech?" "His speech was ours. It seemed to me that it was that of a native of the lower provinces." "Where is he now?" "I know not." "You say that at present he is away?" "Not seeing him in front, I thought he had gone out, for he comes and goes as he pleases. He is not a hired servant, but a guest. He cut down the bushes here in order that he might more easily kill the snakes, for which indeed I am thankful to him, not only for the food that they afford, but because they were in such abundance and so fearless that they often came in here, knowing that they had naught to fear from me." "Then you think that he will return soon?" "As he told me not of his intention of going out at all, I cannot say. He is away sometimes for hours in the forest." "Well, in any case we shall watch here until his return. It may be that he is some idle fellow who prefers killing snakes to honest work, but it may also be that he is the escaped prisoner of whom we are in search." "I hear little of what passes in the town," the priest said quietly. "News would disturb my meditations, and I never question those who come here to ask for my prayers. I have heard of the escape of no prisoner." "It was a young English officer who got away. There has been a great stir about it. Every house in the town has been searched, and every guard boat on the river has been warned to allow no boat to pass without assuring themselves that he is not on board." "This was a brown man like ourselves, clad only in a petticoat of rough cloth like other peasants." "He may have dyed his skin," the officer said. "At any rate, we will stay until he returns and question him. 2 of my men shall take their places just inside the entrance, and seize him as he enters. Has he arms?" "None, save his knife and the stick with which he kills the snakes. It may be that he has seen you coming hither, and, if he has committed any crime, he would flee and not return here at all." "If he does not come back before it is the hour when I must return to the town, I shall leave 4 men to watch for him, and they will wait here, if it is for a week, until he comes back again." "You can do as you please," the priest said. "Only, I pray you, withdraw your men from the neighbourhood of this cell. I would not that my meditations were disturbed by their talk. I have come hither for peace and quietness, and to be apart from the world and its distractions." "You shall not be disturbed," the officer said respectfully, and Stanley heard a movement of feet, and then the closing of the door. Thinking it probable that the officer might make a search round the temple, he at once made off into the wood behind the temple. As soon as he was well among the trees, he exchanged his cloth for the disguise he had worn in the town, and, folding it up to be used as a blanket at night, he went further into the wood, sat down, and proceeded to think what his next step had best be. It was evident that he could not return to the temple for the present, and it was clear, too, that the search for him was still maintained, and that it would not be safe to attempt to descend the river. He regretted that he had been obliged to leave the place without saying goodbye to the priest, and again thanking him for the shelter that he had given him, but he was sure that, when he did not return, the old man would guess that he had caught sight of the officer and his party entering the temple, and had once fled. Had he not known that the guard would remain there, he would have waited until they had returned to the town, and would then have gone in and seen the priest, but as they would remain there for some days, he thought it as well to abandon all idea of returning, as the suspicions that he might be the man sought for would be heightened by his continued absence, and the watch might be continued for a long time on the chance of his coming back. He concluded that, at any rate, his best course would be to endeavour to make his way for a considerable distance down the country, and then to try and get a boat. He knew that the country near the river was comparatively thickly populated, and that the distances between the villages were not great, so that he would find no difficulty in purchasing provisions. The dress he had brought with him was not altogether unfavourable for such a purpose, as he could easily pass as a sub-officer whose duty it was to inquire whether the villages had each sent all their able-bodied men to the war. The only drawback to it would be that, if instructions for his arrest had been sent down to the villages along the road, as well as those by the river, they would have probably been directed to specially look for one clad in such attire. However, it would be open to him at any moment to take to his peasant's disguise again. He at last determined to make a start, and by nightfall had traversed several miles through the great forest stretching along by the side of the Panlong River. He had asked many questions of his friend the officer as they went up to the temple as to the roads. He was told there was one running almost due south to Ramothane, by which he could travel down to Rangoon by way of Tanu. This, however, would take him a long distance from the main river, and he decided that he would presently strike the road that ran about halfway between the hills and the Irrawaddy. He would follow that for a time, and would try and strike the river somewhere between Melloon and Kilwan. Below this point there was a network of rivers and but few villages, and the country was swampy and unhealthy. He infinitely preferred the risks of the descent by the river to those by road, and it seemed to him that if he could but obtain possession of one of the small native fishing boats, he could drop down at night unnoticed, as the width of the river at Ava was upwards of 1,000 yards, and below that town often considerably exceeded that breadth. When it became too dark to proceed further, he sat down at the foot of a tree. He regretted that he had no means of lighting a fire, and determined that, at any risk, he would obtain the means for doing so at the first village he came to, for he knew that there were both tigers and leopards in the jungles. He thought, however, that they were not likely to be numerous so near the capital, and the old priest had never alluded to them as a source of danger, though indeed it had never occurred to him to ask. In the morning he continued his way. He had gone but a mile when he heard a sudden scream in the wood a short distance to his left. Feeling sure that it was a human being in great fear or pain, he drew his knife and ran at the top of his speed in the direction of the cry, thinking that it might be some man or woman attacked by the robbers of the forest. Suddenly he came upon a small open space some 20 yards in diameter. He hesitated when his eyes fell on a group in the centre. 2 men were lying on the ground, and a leopard stood with a paw on each of them. They had guns lying beside them, and a fire was burning close by. He guessed that the animal had sprung from a tree, one of whose boughs had extended almost as far as the centre of the opening. Probably it had killed one of the men in its spring, for at the moment when he saw the animal it was licking the blood from the shoulder of the man on whom his right paw rested. The other was, as far as Stanley could see, unhurt. His tread in the light Burmese shoes had been almost noiseless, and the leopard, which was keeping up a low growling and whose back was toward him, had apparently not noticed it. He hesitated for a moment, and then decided to endeavour to save the man who was still alive. Creeping up stealthily, he gave a sudden spring upon the leopard, and buried his knife to the hilt in its body, just behind the shoulder. With a terrible roar it rolled over for a moment, and then struggled to its feet. The time had been sufficient for Stanley to pick up and cock one of the guns, and as the leopard turned to spring at him, he aimed between its eyes and fired. Again the beast rolled over, and Stanley caught up the other gun, thrust the muzzle within a foot of its head, and fired. The leopard gave a convulsive quiver and lay dead. Chapter 5. With Brigands. Stanley uttered an involuntary hurrah as the leopard expired, and at the sound the Burman, who had been lying motionless, leaped to his feet. He looked at the leopard and then at his rescuer, and exclaimed in a tone of astonishment, "You have slain the beast alone, and with no weapon but your knife?" "No," Stanley replied. "I began the fight with my knife only, but caught up one of these guns when I wounded him, and fired as he charged me. Then I finished him with the other." "Comrade," the Burman said, "you have done a great deed with courage. I, who am esteemed no coward, would never even have thought of attacking that great leopard with but a knife, and that to save the life of a stranger. I saw the guns lying on the ground. Had it not been for that, I should not have dared to attack the leopard, for it would have been certain death." "Certain death, indeed. But tell me first how you did it. It seems to me well nigh a miracle." "I was passing along not far distant when I heard your cry," Stanley said. "Thinking that it was some person in distress, I ran hither, and saw you both lying with the leopard's forepaws upon you. The beast's back was turned to me, and as it was growling, it had not heard my approach. Seeing the guns lying there, and having no doubt that they were loaded, I stole up, sprang suddenly on the leopard, and drove my knife into it behind the shoulder. The blow rolled it over, and gave me time to pick up the gun. The rest was easy. The man, without a word, examined the body of the leopard. "It is as you say," he said. "It is well struck, and it would probably have been fatal, but the animal would have torn you in pieces before he died, but for the guns. Well, comrade, you have saved my life, and I am your servant so long as I live. I thought all was over with me. The leopard, as it sprang, threw its full weight on my comrade here. We had just risen to our feet, and the blow struck me also to the ground. I raised that cry as I fell. I lay there immovable. I felt the leopard's paw between my shoulders, and heard its angry growlings, and I held my breath, expecting every moment to feel its teeth in my neck. I had but one hope, namely that the beast would carry off my comrade, who I was well assured was dead, to the jungle to devour him, and would then come back to fetch me. I managed to breathe once, very quietly, when I felt a movement of the leopard, and hearing a low sound, guessed that he was licking my comrade's blood. But slightly as I moved, the leopard noticed it, and stood straight up again over me. I dared not breathe again, but the time had come when I felt that I must do so, though I was sure that it would be the signal for my death. Then I knew not what had happened. There was a sharp pain as the leopard's claws contracted, and then there was a loud roar, and its weight was removed from me. Then I heard it snarl as if about to spring. Then came the sound of a gun, a fall, and a struggle, and then the sound of another gun. Then I heard your shout, and knew the beast was dead. Now, sir, what can I do for you? Shall I first skin the leopard?" "I care not for the skin," Stanley said. "It would be of no use to me." "Then, with your permission, I will take it off and keep it, as long as I live, as a remembrance of the narrowest escape that I ever had." "Is your comrade dead?" "Yes," the man replied. "The leopard struck him between the shoulders, as you see, and the force of the blow and the weight of the spring must have killed him instantaneously." "Then I will take his sword, gun, and cartridges." So Stanley undid the sword belt and buckled it round him, put the bandolier of cartridges over his shoulders, and took up the gun and reloaded it, while the man was at work skinning the leopard. This operation the man performed with great speed. It was evidently one that he had done before. As soon as the beast was flayed, he rolled up the skin and placed it on his shoulder. "You are an officer, sir?" he asked. "No, I am a fugitive." While he had been watching the man, Stanley had debated over whether he should confide in him, and thought that, after the service he had rendered him, he could do so with safety. "I am an Englishman. I was captured by Bandoola at Ramoo, and sent a prisoner to Ava. I have escaped, and want to make my way down to Rangoon, but I heard that orders have been sent along the river to arrest me, and I do not at present know how to make my way down." "Come with me," the man said. "I have friends in the forest, some distance from here. They will receive you gladly when I tell them what you have done for me, and you will be safe until you choose to go. We are outlaws, but at present we are masters of the forest. The government has its hands full, and there is no fear of their disturbing us." Stanley thought over the matter for a minute or two. Doubtless it was a robber band that he was asked to join, but the offer seemed to promise safety, for a time. "I agree," he said, "so that you do not ask me to take part in any deeds of violence." "About that you shall do as you like," the man said, "but I can tell you that we make good hauls sometimes. Our difficulty is not to capture booty, but to dispose of it. Have you a turban? For that helmet of yours is out of place in the woods. The rest of your dress is nothing peculiar about it, and would attract no attention." "I have a turban. I have been lately in the dress of a peasant. The cloth I wore lies 50 yards away. I dropped it as I ran. It will be useful to cover me at night, if nothing else." Stanley exchanged the helmet for the turban that he had before worn, and fetched the cloth. "Will you bury your companion?" he said. "It would be useless. He will sleep above ground as well as below, and if we are to reach my comrades tonight, it is time for us to be moving." They at once set out. After 5 hours of walking, they came upon the river Maitinge, the tributary that falls into the Irrawaddy at Ava. It was some 400 yards across. The Burman walked along its banks for a short distance, and then pulled from a clump of bushes a small boat that was just capable of carrying two. He put it in the water. They took their seats and paddled across to the other side, where he carefully concealed it as before. "This is our ferry boat," he said. "It is not often used, for our headquarters are in the great forest we shall presently come to, but it is as well, when occasionally parties are sent out to hunt us, to have the means of crossing to the other side." Another 2 hours' walking through cultivated fields brought them to the edge of the forest. "Here you are as safe as if you were in Rangoon," the Burman said. "In another hour we shall reach my comrades. As a rule, we change our headquarters frequently. At present, There is no question of our being disturbed, so we have settled ourselves for a time." "Why were you and your comrade on the other side of the river?" "His village lies 5 miles beyond that forest," the man said. "At ordinary times he dared not venture there, but he thought that, at present, most of the able men would be away, and so he could pay a visit to his friends. He asked me to accompany him, and as I had nothing better to do, I agreed to go. A convoy of traders, too strong to be attacked, had passed down from the hill country the morning before we started. There was not much probability that anyone would come again for a few days." "They bring down rubies from there, do they not?" "The mines are the property of the emperor," the man said, "and the gems are sent down once every 2 months under a strong guard. But for all that, many of the traders bring rubies down from there, of course secretly. The men who work the mines often conceal stones that they come upon, and sell them for a small sum to the traders. Besides, sometimes the peasants pick them up elsewhere, and these, too, make haste to sell them for anything that they can get. We do not care for them much, for it is a risky business going down to Ava to sell them, and the traders there, knowing that, at a word from them, we should be arrested and mostly executed, will give us next to nothing for them. We prefer silver and lead for money, and garments, arms, and set jewels. Each man takes his share of what is captured, and when we have enough, we go home to our villages. A pound of silver or 2 or 3 pounds of lead are generally quite enough to buy the goodwill of the head man of the village. We give out that we had been working on the river or in Ava since we left, and everyone knows better than to ask questions." In another hour they reached the encampment. It was now dusk, and some 25 men were sitting round a great fire. A number of leafy arbours had been constructed in a circle beyond them. "What, returned so soon?" one of the men said, as Stanley's guide came near enough for the firelight to fall on his face. "But where is Ranji, and whom have you brought here? A new recruit?" "Not exactly, Parnik, but one to whom I have promised shelter for a while. Ranji is dead. I should have been dead too, and eaten, had it not been for my comrade here. Here is the skin of the beast who slew Ranji, and when I tell you that the leopard stood with one paw on me, you may guess that my escape was a narrow one." "The brute was a large one," one of the other men said, as Meinik, for such was the name of Stanley's companion, unrolled and held the skin up. "I see it had a bullet between the eyes, and another just behind the ear, and there is a knife cut behind the shoulder. It must have been hot work, when it came to knives, with a beast of that size." "Give us some food and cocoa. We have eaten nothing today, and have walked far. When we have fed, I will tell you my story." The Burman's recital of the adventure with the leopard excited great applause and admiration from his comrades. "'Tis wonderful," one said. "Not so much that our comrade should have killed the leopard, though that was a great deal, a major feat, but that, armed only with a knife, he should attack a beast like this, to save the life of a stranger. Truly, I never heard of such a thing. Has he all his senses?" Meinik nodded. He had received permission from Stanley to say who he was. Stanley had consented with some reluctance, but the man assured him that he could trust his companions as well as himself, and that it was much better to tell the truth, as it would soon be seen that his features differed altogether from their own, and that therefore he was some strange person in disguise. "He is in his senses," he said, "but he does not see things as we do. He is one of those English barbarians who have taken Rangoon, and against whom our armies are marching. He was captured at Ramoo, and sent by Bandoola as a prisoner to Ava. He has made his escape, and will in a short while go down the river, but at present the search is too hot for him. So you see that he is, like ourselves, a fugitive." "What is his age?" one of the men asked, after a silence, during which they all gazed at the newcomer. "He is but a lad, being, as he tells me, between 16 and 17, but you see his skin is stained and his face marked, so as to give him the appearance of age." "If the men of his race are as brave as he is, Meinik, our troops will truly have harder work than they think to drive them into the sea. Does he speak our tongue?" "Yes," Stanley answered for himself. "I have been more than 2 years in the province of Chittagong, and learned it from one who was in our service." "And would many of your people risk their lives in the way you did, for a stranger?" "Certainly. Many men constantly run risks as great to save others." "One life is all a man has," the Burman said. "Why should he give it for a stranger?" "I don't think that we stop to think of that," Stanley said. "It seems to us natural that if we see another in danger of his life, we should try to save it, whether it is a man or a woman, whether it be from fire or from any other fate." "You must be a strange people," the Burman said gravely, "and I should scarce have credited it, had I not heard that you had done it yourself. But it is wonderful, and you too, a lad who has not yet come to his full strength." We should be glad to have such a man for our comrade, my friends. Whether he be Burman or English matters little. He has risked his life for one of us, and he is our brother as long as he likes to stay with us." There was a warm exclamation of assent round the circle, and Stanley felt that he had no cause for uneasiness as long as he remained with them. In the evening the men sang many songs, and at their request Stanley sang some English ones, choosing some with lively airs. The Burmese were much pleased and surprised at this, and joined merrily in the chorus. Half a dozen of them then set to work with their knives, cut down some saplings and boughs, and constructed for Stanley an arbour similar to the others, and he lay down well satisfied with the results of his adventure, and feeling that he could remain with these merry fellows, criminals though they might be, until it would be safe to make his way down the river. In the morning the men started early, leaving him to charge the fire. They went off in parties of 4 or 5 to watch the various roads leading to the capital, 2 or 3 of them dressed as peasants, going to towns where travellers would halt, so as to gain information as to any party coming down. When they gathered again at dusk, one party only had had any success. They had met 6 merchants coming down with horses laden with spices, indigo, and cotton. These had offered no resistance, and they had taken as much as they could carry, and then allowed them to go on with the rest of their goods. There was a general feeling of regret that the party had not been more numerous, and some expressions of anger at the spies on the road by which the traders had come, for not letting them know beforehand, so that they could have placed their whole force there and carried away all the goods. "These are the things that suit us best," Meinicke said to Stanley. "You see, one can go down with a parcel of cinnamon or pepper, or a bag of dyes, or 50 pounds of cotton into the town, and sell it in the market at a fair and proper price. Of course one dresses oneself as a small cultivator, and there is no suspicion whatever that all is not right. We shall keep a sharp lookout for the men as they come back again, and relieve them of the silver or goods they may have taken in exchange, that is, if they come by the same road. But it is more likely that, after their adventure today, they will choose some other, or take a guide and travel by village tracks. No doubt they think that they have got off easily, for they have not lost more than a quarter of their goods. It's war time now, and there is no fear of a force being sent against us, but usually we do not have to take so much as a quarter of the merchandise. Were they to lose everything, they would make complaints, and then we should have a force sent up against us, and be obliged to move away for a time. But as it is, they are so pleased with getting the greater part of their goods safe to market that they do not care to make a fuss about it, for they might have to pay the court officials and others more than the value of the goods lost." "They do not often resist, then?" Stanley asked. "Not often. If a man loses his goods he can gather more again, but when his life has gone, everything has gone. Besides, as a rule, we take care that we are so strong that they see at once that resistance would be hopeless. Sometimes they bring armed guards with them. These are men who make it their business to convoy traders down when the times are troubled. Sometimes we have fights with these, but as a rule we seldom attack them, unless we are so strong that they do not dare to oppose us. Still, we do have fights sometimes, for these Shan guards are brave fellows. Their convoys are generally rich ones, for it would not pay small traders to hire men to protect them. In times of peace we seldom stop long in one neighbourhood, for when it once becomes known what road we are lying near, they come along in parties too strong to be attacked, and as it matters little to us where we live, we move away perhaps 100 miles, and then settle on another line of traffic. We have not been here long. We were last down by Tanu, and did well for a long time there, until at last the governor raised all the villagers and hunted the woods, and we found that we had to leave. I expect we shall stay here some time now. There is no fear of troops being sent out, and we can afford not to press too hardly on travellers, for we have done so well of late that we could separate and return to our homes, each with a good store of booty. Half our number did leave when we came up from the south, and more of us would go if it were not for this order that everyone shall join the army. It's much more pleasanter to live here, free to do as we like, than to be driven down like a herd of beasts to fight. Besides, we have no quarrel with your people. It was the officials of Aracan who began it. Let them fight if they like." Stanley remained a fortnight with the band. At the end of that time they heard that a party of 30 traders were coming down together, and that if they had with them 10 armed guards. This, they no doubt supposed, was ample protection, for as the band generally worked in such small parties, it was believed that there were but a few outlaws in the forest. All the band went out and returned in the evening, laden with spoil. 2 or 3 of them were wounded, but not severely. "So you had resistance today, Meinik?" "It lasted only for a minute," the man said. As soon as they saw how strong we were, the guard were glad enough to put up their swords and let us bind them hand and foot, while we searched the merchants. As you see, we have made a good capture, though we have not seized more than a fifth of what they brought down with them. But it will take them some time to pack their bales again, for we searched everything thoroughly, and made all the merchants strip, and searched their clothes and their hair." "What did you do that for?" "Well, it was this way. I said to my comrades as we went along this morning, 'The Englishman is going to leave us in a day or two. I have not forgotten what I owe him, and should like to make him a present. I propose that we search all the party thoroughly today. For what we heard, some of them come from the ruby country, and are pretty sure to have gems concealed about them or in their baggage. I propose that all the stones we find we will give to our friend.' They all agreed at once, for, as you know, they all like you, and rubies, as I told you, are of little use to us, for we cannot dispose of them without great risk. So they did as I proposed, and had good fortune. 12 out of the number had gems hidden about them, and some of them a good lot. You need not hesitate to take them, for you may be sure that they bought them for next to nothing, from poor fellows who had risked their lives to hide them. There they are. We have not looked at them, but just emptied the parcels into this bag as we found them. Of course, they are all rough stones. You must take them as a present from all of us, and as a proof that a Burman, even if he is but a robber, is grateful for such a service as that you rendered him." Stanley felt that he could not refuse a gift so offered, even though the goods were stolen. As Meinik said, the gems were of little use to the robbers, since they were afraid to try and dispose of them, and their owners had themselves broken the law in having purchased them, and had doubtless given sums bearing no proportion to their real value. Therefore he thanked Meinik very heartily, and also, after they had had their meal, the rest of the band, who made very light of the matter. The things were useless to them, they said. If it had been silver or even lead, it would have been different, but to endeavour to sell rubies they had to risk their lives, and goods that they had got that day would fetch them far more money than the rubies, and could be sold without difficulty, and as soon as the war was over and they could go down to their villages, the bands would break up. They had enough silver and lead hidden away to keep them for years, even if they never did any work whatever. "What do you do with it when you get back?" "We hide it. It would never do to enter a village with 10 or 12 pounds weight of silver, and 3 or 4 times as much lead, for the headman might take it into his head to have us searched. So we generally dig a hole at the foot of a tree in some quiet spot, and take perhaps a pound of silver and 2 or 3 of lead with us. A gift of half that silver is enough to convince the headman that we are honest fellows, who have been working hard since we went away, and from time to time we can go to our store and get what we want from it, and can build a house and marry and take up a field or two, and perhaps become headmen ourselves before very long." "Well, I am sure I wish you all well," Stanley said. "You have all been very kind to me since I joined you, and I shall be glad to think of you all as settled quietly down in your villages, rather than as remaining here when, some day or other, you might all be captured and harm come to you." The next morning Stanley started with Meinik, who was a native of a small village on the river some 40 miles below Ava, and who had resolved to accompany Stanley down to Rangoon. "I shall be able to get a boat and some nets for a pound or 2 of lead. If we are hailed I can do the talking, and can land and buy provisions if wanted. I have arranged with my comrades to take my share of the silver and lead we have stored up at once, for it is likely that they shall also have gone to their homes before I shall have returned, and we have changed everything into money except what we took yesterday." Before starting, Stanley was again dyed, and the tattoo marks imitated, far more carefully than before, 3 or 4 of the men operating upon him at once. His face was almost entirely covered with these marks. Some liquid was applied that extracted the colour from his eyebrows and left them snow white. Some of his hair was similarly treated, and, looking at himself in a pool of water, Stanley did not in the least degree recognize himself, and felt certain that no one would suspect him of being the young English captive. Resuming his peasant's cloth, he took a hearty farewell of the band and started with Meinik. The latter carried a bundle slung on his gun. It contained some clothes and did not look heavy, but in the centre were 2 parcels that weighed some 40 pounds. Stanley carried a bundle with his other clothes and several pounds of rice. 2 days' walking took them to Meinik's village. Once out of the forest they travelled at night, and reached the village just as the people were astir. The place consisted of 10 or 12 huts, and Meinik created quite an excitement among the few people who inhabited. These consisted of 2 or 3 old men, some women, and children. "Where have you been for the last year and a half, Meinik, if I may ask?" "Working near Ava," he said. "Just as I should have to go to war if I had remained there, I thought that I would come back and see how you all were. I have saved a little money and may settle down, but whether here or elsewhere I have not yet made up my mind." "You will have to go to the war," one of the old men said. "There is scarce a day that one of the war canoes does not stop here, to see if there are any able-bodied men. They have taken 8, and they will assuredly take you." "Then I shall get a boat," Meinik said, "and take to fishing. The war cannot last long, and I shall do my best to keep out of the way of the war canoes until it is over. If any of you have a boat to sell, I will buy it." "I will sell you mine," the old man said. "Both of my sons have been taken to the war, and I am too old to work it myself. It is a good one. My sons made it only last year. Whom have you with you?" Stanley had remained a short distance off, while Meinik was talking to his friends. "He is an old man I joined along the road. He is a skilful fisherman, and he has agreed to go with me if I can get a boat." "Is there an empty hut?" "Yes, 6 of them. Of course, when the men were taken, they carried off the wives and children, as usual, as hostages for their conduct." Meinik nodded. He felt no surprise, as it was the custom in Burma to hold the women and children of all the men going to the war, as guarantees that their husbands would not desert or show cowardice in battle. In either event, their relatives would be at once put to death. "My companion is tired," Meinik said. "We walked all night, so we will cook some food and he will sleep." They at once took possession of one of the empty huts, which was just as it was left by its proprietor. One of the women brought a brand or two from her hearth. An earthen cooking pot was filled with water and placed above it, and a few handfuls of rice dropped in. 2 or 3 snakes, cut up into small pieces, and some pepper pods were added, and then Meinik went out, talking to his acquaintances, and arranged for the purchase of the boat. Stanley watched the fire. In an hour Meinik returned. "The boat is a good one," he said, "and the nets are in fair order. I have bought them for 2 pounds of lead, and have promised that, when the war is over, and the man's sons return, it is to be free to them to buy it back at the same price." After eating their meal, they both lay down and slept until late in the afternoon. Then Meinik bought an earthenware pot, and a flat slab of the same material for making a fire on, some peppers and capsicums, and a little cinnamon and nutmeg, a basket of mangoes, and some tobacco. As soon as it became dusk, they took their places in the boat, Meinik carrying down 2 or 3 faggots of wood. The boat was a canoe, hewn out of a pine log. It would have carried 4 people comfortably, and there was plenty of room for them both to lie down at full length. It was very light, the wood having been cut away until it was little thicker than cardboard. This was the almost universal method of construction, even the war canoes that would carry 60 paddlers, sitting 2 by 2 on a bench, and 30 soldiers, being hewn from great single logs of teak. The nets were stowed 1 at each end. In the middle was the fireplace, on which the brands of the fire had already been laid. Near it were the faggots and stores. Meinik and Stanley sat down on the nets, each with a paddle. The former had hidden the greater portion of his store of money in the ground before entering the village. As soon as they had fairly started, Stanley said: "Had we not better get rid of the fire, Meinik? Its light should draw attention to us." "That matters little," the Burman replied. "There are not likely to be war canoes about at night, and I expect that most of them will have gone down the river. People fish either by night or by day, and even if a war canoe came along, they would not trouble about it, for of course many men too old to go to the war remain here, and go on fishing. People cannot starve because there is fighting. The old men and women must cultivate the fields, and fish, or both they and the people of their towns would starve. Many even of the young men do not go. They keep away from their villages during the day, and work in the fields, and the headmen shut their eyes, for they know that, if the fields are not cultivated, the people cannot pay their share of the taxes. Still, it is as well to be on the safe side. When the fire has burnt low, we will lay a cloth over the top of the boat, so that the glow of the embers will not be seen." They kept their course near the middle of the river, partly because the current there was stronger, partly because any war canoes that might be coming up would keep close to one bank or the other. They kept on their way until there was a faint gleam of light in the sky, and then paddled in to the shore, chose a spot where some bushes drooped down into the water, and, forcing the canoe in behind these, so as to be entirely concealed from the sight of any passing boat, cooked some food, and, having eaten their breakfast, lay down and slept until evening. Night after night the journey was continued. Their supply of food was ample to last them, and there was therefore no occasion to stop at any village to purchase more. The river at the point where they had started was about 2 miles wide, but at some point it was double that width, while at others it contracted to a little over a mile. Its level was much lower now than it had been when Stanley ascended it 2 months before. Sometimes at night they towed one of their nets behind them, and obtained an ample supply of fish for their wants. Each night they made, as Stanley calculated, about 40 miles, and after 10 days' travel they came to the point where the great river divided, one small arm running down to Rangoon, another descending into Bassein, and then falling into the sea at Cape Negrais, while a large proportion of the water found its way down by innumerable branches between the Rangoon and Bassein River. For the last 2 or 3 days they had been obliged to observe great caution, for below Prome there were numbers of boats all going down the river, laden with men and stores. These, however, only travelled by day, and the canoe was always at that time either floating in the shelter of bushes or hauled up on the bank at spots where it could be concealed from view by thick growths of rushes. "We shall never be able to get down to Rangoon by water," said Meinik. "The river will be crowded with rowboats near the town, and there will be no chance whatever of making our way through them. At the next village we come to I will go in and learn the news. Your countrymen may have been driven out by this time, and in that case there will be nothing to do but to travel north on foot until we reach Chittagong." "I have no fear that we shall be driven out, Meinik." This conversation had occurred on the night when they had passed the point of division of the two arms of the river. They had caught a larger supply of fish than usual, and as soon as the boat was laid up, Meinik started along the bank with a number of them for the nearest village. He returned in 2 hours. "It is well I landed," he said, "for the point where the greater portion of our people are gathered is Irrawaddy, only some 15 miles further on. You are right, your people have not been driven out. A large number of our troops are down near Rangoon, but in the fighting that has taken place we have gained no advantage. Your people marched out at the end of May, carried a stockade, and advanced to Johazwang, and attacked some villages defended by stockades, and carried them, after having killed 100 of our men. Then a great stockade on a hill near the river, 3 miles from Rangoon, which our people thought could not be taken, so strongly was it protected, was attacked. The guns of your people made a great gap in a stockade a mile in front of it. 200 men were killed, and also the commander. Then your people marched on to the great stockade of Kemindine. Your troops, when they got there, saw how strong it was and were afraid to attack it. They lay down all night close to it, and we thought we should destroy them all when they attacked in the morning. But their ships that had come up with them opened fire at daybreak. As the stockades were hidden from the sight of those on the river, we had thought that the ships could do nothing, but they shot great balls up into the air, and they came down inside the stockade, where they burst with an explosion like the noise of a big gun, and killed so many that the troops could not remain under so terrible a fire, and went away, leaving it to your people to enter the stockade without fighting." Chapter 6: Among Friends. "It certainly seems to me," Stanley said, when he heard the Burman's account of the state of things below, "that it will not be possible for us to go any further by water." "It would be very dangerous," Meinik said. "It is certain that all men in this part of the country have been obliged to go with the army, and even were we both natives, and had no special reason for avoiding being questioned, we should be liable to be seized and executed at once, for having disregarded the orders to join the army. Assuredly we cannot pass down farther in our boat, but must take to the land. I should say that we had best get spears and shields, and join some newly arrived party." "But you forget that, though my disguise as a native is good enough to mislead anyone passing us on the road," said Stanley, "or in the dusk after sunset, I should certainly attract attention if travelling with them by day." "Oh, I forgot that. I have grown so accustomed to seeing you that I forget that, to other people, your face would seem strange, as it at first did to me in the forest. Indeed, you look to me now like one of ourselves, but were we to join a band, someone would be sure to ask questions concerning you ere long. What then do you think we had best do?" "From what I heard of the country from one of your comrades, who is a native of this province, it would be impossible for us, after crossing the river, to make our way down on the opposite side, since the whole country is swampy and cut up by branches of the Irrawaddy. On this side there are a few obstacles of that kind, but on the other hand, we shall find the country full of troops going down towards Rangoon. Your comrade told me that the hills that we saw to the east, from the forest at Ava, extended right down into Tanarassaram, and were very high, and could not be traversed, for that no food could be obtained, and that tigers and wild animals and other beasts abounded. But he said that the smaller hills that we crossed on the way to your village, which he called the Pegu Yoma Hills, some of those swells come down to the bank, extending all the way down to the sea, between the Irrawaddy and the Sitang rivers, and that from them streams flowed to one river or the other. Therefore, if we could gain that range, we should avoid the swamp country altogether. A few miles back we passed a river coming in from the east, and if we follow that up as far as there is water, we shall be among the hills. He said there were no mountains at all there, just rounded hills, with many villages and much cultivated ground, so there ought to be no difficulty in making our way along. We shall be able to gather food in the fields, or can go into villages and purchase some, for the men will all be away. Besides, we can get spears and shields, and can say that, having been away from home on a journey, when the men were all ordered to war, we returned too late to go with the rest of the villagers, and are making our way down to join them. Many others must be doing the same, and the story will be likely enough. In that way, we can get down till we are close to the troops around Rangoon, and must then take our chance of getting through them." "Yes, that seems better than the other way," Meinik said. "There is such a river as you speak of, above Sarawa. We can paddle back tonight, and hide near the town. Then I can go there in the morning, and buy a couple of spears and shields, and get some more rice and other things. We have plenty of ammunition for our guns, which we may want if we meet any wild beasts." "You don't think there will be any danger in your going in there, Meinik? Of course, there is no absolute occasion for us to have spears and shields, as we have guns." "We ought to have shields," Meinik replied, "and it were better to have spears, too, and also for us to carry axes. Everyone carries an axe in wartime, for we always erect stockades, and though a very poor man may only have his knife, everyone who can afford it takes an axe. Most people have such a thing, for it is wanted for cutting firewood, for clearing the ground, for building houses, and for many other things, and a Burman must be poor indeed who does not own one." "By all means, then, get them for us, Meinik. Besides, we may find them useful for ourselves." They now lay down and slept until evening, and then started up the river again, keeping close in under shadow of the bank, and 2 hours before daylight concealed the canoe as usual, at a spot 2 miles above Sarawa. Meinik started at daybreak, and returned 3 hours later with 2 axes, spears, and shields. That night they turned into the river running to the east, and for 4 nights paddled up it. The country was now assuming a different character, and the stream was running in a valley with rising ground, from 100 to 150 feet high on each side, and was narrowing fast. Toward morning on the 5th day the river had become a small stream of but 2 or 3 feet deep, and they decided to leave the boat, as it was evident that they would be able to go but a short distance further. "We may as well hide her carefully," Stanley said. "It is certainly not likely that we shall want her again, but there is never any saying, and at any rate there is no great trouble in doing it." They cooked a meal, and then started at once, so as to do a few hours' walking before the sun became high. They determined to keep on eastward, until they reached the highest point of the dividing ridge between the 2 main rivers, and then to follow it southward. The country was now well cultivated, and they had some trouble in avoiding the small villages dotted thickly about, as the course they were following was not the one they would take if making straight to join the army. They slept for 3 or 4 hours in the heat of the day, and then, pushing on, found themselves before sunset on what seemed to them the highest point of the divide. To the right they could see the flat country stretching towards the Irrawaddy. To the left the ground was more sharply undulating. 2 miles away was a stream of fair size, which they judged to be the river that runs down to Pegu, and afterwards joins the Rangoon River below the town. Stanley thought that the hill on which they stood was some 500 feet above the low country they had left. A great part of the hills were covered with trees, although at the point where they had made their way up the hillside was bare. They went on until they entered the forest, and there set to work to chop firewood. Meinik carried a tinder box, and soon had a fire blazing, and by its side they piled a great stock of wood. "I do not know that there are any leopards so far south as this," he said, "but at any rate it will be safer to keep a big fire blazing. I never used to think much about leopards, but ever since I had that great beast's foot upon my back, I have had a terror of them." The next morning they continued their journey south, going along boldly and passing through several villages. "You are late for the war," an old man said, as they went through one of them. "I know we are," Meinik replied, "but we are away with a caravan of traders when the order came, and so instead of going down the river we have had to journey on foot. But we shall be there in time. From what we have heard, there has not been much fighting yet." "No, the white barbarians are all shut up in Rangoon. We have not attacked them in earnest, but we shall soon do so, and moreover, they will soon be all starved, for the country has been swept clear of all cattle for 20 miles round, the villages deserted, and everything laid waste, and we hear that half their number are laid up with sickness, and that a great number have died. I wish that I were younger, that I too could help to destroy the insolent foes who have dared to set foot on our sacred soil." There was no need for haste now, and they travelled by easy stages until, by the smoke rising from different parts of the forest, they knew that they were approaching the spot where the Burmese forces lay around Rangoon, and indeed could see the great pagoda rising above the surrounding country. They had heard, at the last villages through which they had passed, that there had been an attack made upon the pagoda on the 1st of July. On that day the Burmese, in great force, had moved down in a line parallel to the road between the pagoda and the town, along which a considerable number of our troops were encamped. They had advanced until within half a mile of Rangoon, then had changed front and attacked the British position near the town. They occupied a hill near our line, and opened fire from there with jingals and small cannon, but 2 British guns firing grape soon silenced their guns, and a Madras regiment charged the hill and recaptured it. This entirely upset the plan of the Wungee in command of the Burmese. The signal for the whole of the army to attack was to have been given as soon as their left had broken through the British line, and had thus cut off all the troops on the road leading to the pagoda from the town. Seeing that this movement had failed, the general did not give the signal for the general attack, but ordered the troops to fall back. He had been recalled in disgrace to Ava, and a senior officer, who arrived just after the battle, assumed the command. He at once set to work to make a very strong stockade at Kummeroot, 5 miles from the great pagoda, and also fortified a point on the river above Kemmerdine, the stockade that had been captured by the British, and intended from this point to send down fire rafts to destroy the British shipping, and at the same time make continuous attacks at night on the British lines. The rains at this time were falling incessantly, and the Burmese did not think that the British would be able to move out against them. The position on the river was connected with that at Kummeroot by strong stockades, and the Burmese general was convinced that, if an attack was made, it could be easily defeated. However, 8 days after the repulse of the Burmese first attack, the vessels came up the river, while a land column moved against Kummeroot. The position was a strong one. The river was here divided into 2 branches, and on the point of land between these the principal stockade was erected, and was well provided with artillery, while on the opposite banks of both rivers other stockades with guns were erected, so that any attack by water would be met by the direct fire from the great stockade, and a crossfire from those on the banks. 4 ships came up, and the Burmese guns opened upon them, but the heavy fire from the men of war was not long in silencing them, and then a number of boats full of troops had landed and stormed the stockade and driven out the Burmese. The land column had been unable to take guns with them, owing to the impossibility of dragging them along the rain-sodden paths, and the Burmese chiefs, confident in the strength of their principal post, which was defended by 3 lines of strong stockades, one above another, and in their immensely superior force, treated with absolute contempt the advance of the little British column, of which they were informed as soon as it started by their scouts thickly scattered through the woods. The general, Soomba Wangee, was just sitting down to dinner when he was told that the column had nearly reached the first stockade. He directed his chiefs to proceed to their posts and drive the audacious strangers away, and continued his meal, until the heavy and rapid musketry of the assailants convinced him that the matter was more serious than he had expected. As a rule, the Burmese generals do not take an active part in their battles, but Soomba Wangee left his tent, and at once went toward the point attacked. He found his troops already retreating, and that the 2 outer stockades had been carried by the enemy. He rallied his men, and himself led the way to the attack, but the steady and continuous fire of the British rendered it impossible for him to restore order, and the Burmese remained crowded together in a hopeless confusion. However, he managed to gather together a body of officers and troops, and, with them, charged desperately upon the British soldiers. He, with several other leaders of rank, was killed, and the Burmese were scattered through the jungle, leaving 800 dead behind them. The fact that 10 stockades, provided with 30 pieces of artillery, should have been captured in one day by the British, had created a deep impression among the villagers of the neighbourhood, from whom the truth could not be concealed, and indeed all the villages for many miles round the scene of action were crowded with wounded. They told Meinik that the army was, for a time, profoundly depressed. Many had deserted, and the fact that stockades they had thought impregnable were of no avail whatever against the enemy, whose regular and combined action was irresistible, as against their own isolated and individual method of fighting, had shaken their hitherto profound belief in their own superiority to any people with whom they might come in contact. Since that time no serious fighting had taken place. Occasional night attacks had been made, and all efforts on the part of the invaders to obtain food, by foraging parties, had proved unsuccessful. The boats of the fleet had gone up the Puzendown River, that joined the Rangoon River some distance below the town, and had captured a large number of boats that had been lying there, waiting until Rangoon was taken, before going up the river with their cargoes of rice and salt fish. But they had gained no other advantage, for although the villages were crowded with the fugitives from the town, these were driven into the jungle by the troops stationed there for the purpose, as soon as the boats were seen coming up the river. In some cases, however, the boat had arrived so suddenly that there had not been time to do this, and the fugitives had been taken to Rangoon, where it was said they had been very well treated. Great reinforcements had now come down from the upper provinces. 2 of the king's brothers had arrived to take command of the army. One had established himself at Donabew, the other at Pegu. They had brought with them numbers of astrologers to fix upon a propitious time for an attack, and the king's invulnerables, several thousands strong, a special corps whom neither shot nor steel could injure, were with them. About the 6th of August, a strong position that had been taken up by a force sent by the prince at Pegu, in the old Portuguese fort of Siriam, had been attacked, with orders that the channel of the Rangoon River should be blocked, so that none of the strangers should escape the fate that awaited them. The position was a very strong one. The trees and brushwood round the fort had been cleared away. Wherever there were gaps in the old wall stockades had been erected, and great beams suspended from the parapet, in order that, if an attack was made, the ropes could be cut, and the beams fall upon the heads of the assailants. The British had, however, thrown a bridge across a deep creek, pushed on against the place, and carried it in a few minutes, the garrison flying, as soon as the assailants gained the ramparts, to a pagoda standing on a very steep hill, defended by guns, and assailable only by a very steep flight of steps. The troops, however, pressed up these fearlessly, and the garrison, discouraged and shaken by the reports of the fugitives from the lower fort, had fled as soon as the British arrived at the top of the steps. Notwithstanding this and other as successful attacks upon their stockades, the Burmese troops now felt confident that with their numerous forces they would be victorious whenever the astrologers decided that the favourable moment had arrived. Meinik had ascertained from the villagers the name of the leader and the locality to which the corps belonged that was posted nearest to Rangoon. As soon as it was dark, he and Stanley entered the forest. The smoke had served as a guide to them as to the position of the different corps, and they were able to make their way between these without being questioned. Presently, however, they came upon a strong picket. "Where are you going?" the officer in command asked. "To join the corps of the Woondock Snodee," Meinik replied. "We were away at Bono when the order came, and the rest had gone down the river before we got to Mew, so we came on by ourselves, not wishing to fail in our duty." "You are just in time," the officer said. "The Woondock is a quarter of a mile away, on the left." They moved off in that direction, but soon left the track, and, avoiding the camp, kept away until they reached the edge of the forest. Then they crept forward through the jungle and brushwood, pausing to listen from time to time, and 3 times changing their course to avoid parties of the Burmese acting as outposts. On issuing from the jungle, they crawled forward for 300 or 400 yards, so as to be beyond musket shot of the outposts, and then remained quiet until morning broke. Then they could perceive redcoats moving about in a small village before which a breastwork had been thrown up, some 400 yards away from them, and, getting up to their feet, ran toward them. Several shots were fired at them from the jungle behind, and some soldiers at once appeared at the breastwork. Supposing that the 2 figures approaching were Burmese deserters, they did not fire, and Stanley and his companion were soon among them. They were soldiers of one of the Bengal regiments, and Stanley, to their surprise, addressed them in their own language. "I am an Englishman," Stanley said. "I am one of the prisoners whom they took at Ramoo, and have escaped from their hands. Are there any of your officers in the village?" "I will take you to them," a native sub-officer said, and Stanley in a minute or 2 entered a cottage, in which 4 English officers were just taking their early breakfast, preparatory to turning out on duty. "Whom have you got here, Jemadar?" one of them asked in Bengali. Stanley answered for himself. "I am an Englishman, sir, and have just escaped from Ava." The officer uttered an exclamation of surprise. "Well, sir," the senior of them said, as he held out his hand to Stanley, "I congratulate you on having got away, whoever you are, but I am bound to say that, if it were not for your speech, I should not have believed you, for I have never seen anyone look less like an Englishman than you do. "My name is Stanley Brooke, sir. I am the son of the late Captain Brooke of the 15th Native Regiment." "Then I should know you," one of the other officers said, "for I knew your father, and I remember seeing your name on the list of officers killed at Ramoo, and wondered if it could be the lad I knew 5 or 6 years ago." "And I recollect you, Captain Cook," Stanley said. "Your regiment was at Agra when we were there." "Right you are, and I am heartily glad that the news of your death was false," and he shook hands cordially with Stanley. "And who is your companion?" the major asked. "Is he an Englishman, too?" "No, sir, he is a native. He is a most faithful fellow. He has acted as my guide all the way down from the point we started from, 20 miles from Ava. I could never have accomplished it without his aid, for although I speak Burmese well enough to pass anywhere, my face is so different in shape from theirs that, if I were looked at closely in the daytime, I should be suspected at once. I could never have got here without his aid." "How was it that you came to help you, sir?" Major Pemberton asked. "As far as we can see, the Burmese hate us like poison. Even when they are wounded to death, they will take a last shot at any soldiers marching past them." "Well, I happened to save his life from a leopard," Stanley said, "and truly he has shown his gratitude." "Jemadar," the major said, "take that man away with you. See that he is well treated. Give him some food, of course. He will presently go with this officer to the general." Stanley said a few words in Burmese to Meinik, telling him that he was to have food, and would afterward go with him to the general. He then, at the invitation of the officers, sat down with them to breakfast. While eating it, Stanley told them something of his adventures. After the meal was over, the major said: "You had better go with Mr. Brooke to the general, Captain Cook. I cannot well leave the regiment. We can let you have an outfit, Mr. Brooke, though we are, most of us, reduced pretty well to our last garments. What with the jungle and what with the damp, we have nearly all arrived at the last state of dilapidation. But I am sure the general would like to see you in your present disguise." "It makes no difference to me, sir," Stanley said with a laugh. "I am so accustomed to this black petticoat now that I should almost feel strange in anything else. I am afraid this dye will be a long time before it wears itself out. It is nearly 3 weeks since I was dyed last, and it has faded very little yet." "Oh, you need not take your arms, anyway," Captain Cook said. "You will attract less attention going without them, for it will only be supposed that you are one of the natives who have been brought in by the boats." Meinik was sitting on the ground contentedly outside the cottage, the jemadar standing beside him. "Have you had any food, Meinik?" Stanley asked. The man nodded. "Good food," he said. "That is all right. Now, come along with us. You can leave your weapons here. They won't be wanted." Meinik rose and followed Stanley and Captain Cook. There were houses scattered all along the roadside. These were now all occupied by officers and troops, and there were so many of them that it had not been necessary to place any of the men under canvas, an important consideration during the almost continuous rain of the last 3 months. "Why, Cook, I did not know that you talked Burmese," an officer standing at one of the doors remarked, as the officer came up, chatting with Stanley. "You don't know all my accomplishments, Phillipson," the captain laughed, for the idea that there existed such a thing as a Burmese peasant who could talk English had not occurred to the other officer. "I am taking him to the chief to show off my powers," and passed on, leaving the officer looking after him with a puzzled expression on his face. On their arrival at Sir Archibald Campbell's headquarters, Captain Cook sent in his name, and as the general was not at the moment engaged, he was at once shown in, followed by Stanley. Meinik waited without. "Good morning, sir. I see you have brought in a deserter," the general said. "No, he is not a deserter, sir. He is an escaped prisoner who has made his way down from Ava through the enemy's lines. This is Mr. Brooke. He was serving as an officer with the native levy at Ramoo, and was reported as killed. However, he was fortunately only stunned, and being the only officer found alive, was sent by Bandoola as a prisoner to Ava. I might say that he is a son of the late Captain Brooke of the 15th Native Infantry." "Well, you are certainly wonderfully disguised," the general said, "and I congratulate you heartily on your escape. I should have passed you by as a native without a second glance, though, now that I am told you are an Englishman, I can see that you have not the wide cheekbones and flat face of a Burman. How did you manage to make your way down?" "I travelled almost entirely by night, sir, and had with me a faithful guide. He is outside. I don't think that I should ever have got down without him, though I speak Burmese well enough to pass, especially as the language differs so much in the different districts." "Is he a Burman?" "Yes, General." "Have you arranged with him for any particular sum for his services? If so, it will of course be paid." "No, sir. He came down simply in gratitude for a service I rendered him. I do not know whether he intends to go back, but I hope that he will remain here, with me." "I have brought Mr. Brooke here, sir," Captain Cook said, "at the request of the Major, thinking that you might like to ask him some questions as to the state of things in the interior." "I should like to have a long talk with Mr. Brooke," the general said, "but unless he has any certain news of the date they intend to attack us, I will not detain him now. The first thing will be for him to get into civilized clothing again. By the way, poor young Hitchcock's effects are to be sold this morning. I should think that they would fit Mr. Brooke very well. Let me see. Of course, your pay has been running on since you were taken prisoner, Mr. Brooke." "I am afraid, sir, that there is no pay due," Stanley said. "I happened to be at Ramoo at the time, looking after some goods of my uncle, who carries on a considerable trade on the coast, and as I talked the language, and there were very few who did so, I volunteered to act as an officer with the native levy. I preferred to act as a volunteer, in order that I might be free to leave at any time, if I received an order from my uncle to join him at Chittagong. I could give an order on him, but I don't know where he is to be found. I have with me some uncut rubies, though I have no idea what they are worth, for I have not even looked at them yet, but they should certainly be good security for £50. "We can certainly settle that presently, Mr. Brooke. I will write an order on the paymaster for 500 rupees, and you can talk the matter over afterwards. I am afraid that you will have to pay rather high for the clothes, for almost everyone here has worn out his kit, and Mr. Hitchcock only joined us a fortnight before his death, so that his are in very good condition. Of course, they are all uniform. He was on my staff, but that will not matter. You could hardly be going about in civilian clothes here. I shall be very glad if you will dine with me at 6 o'clock this evening. Have a talk with your man before that, and see what he wants to do. If he is a sharp fellow, he might be very useful to us." The general wrote the order on the paymaster, and Captain Cook took Stanley across to the office, and obtained the cash for it. Making inquiry, he found that the sale was to come off in a quarter of an hour. "I will do the bidding for you, if you like, Brooke," Captain Cook said. "I dare say you would rather not be introduced generally in your present rig." "Much rather not, and I shall be much obliged by your doing it." "All right. I will make your money go as far as I can. Of course, the poor fellow brought no full dress uniform with him, or anything of that sort." "You will find me here with my Burman," Stanley said. "We will stroll around the place for half an hour, and then come back here again." There was really very little to see in the town. Meinik was astonished, when they mounted the river bank and had a view of the ships lying at anchor. For a time he was too surprised to speak, never having seen anything larger than the clumsy cargo boats which made a voyage once a year up the river. "It is wonderful," he said at last. "Who would have thought of such great ships? If the emperor could but see them, I think that he would make peace. It is easy to see that you know many things more than we do. Could one go on board of them?" "Well, not as I am at present, Meinik, but when I get English clothes on again, and rid myself from some of this stain, I have no doubt I shall be able to take you on board one of the ships of war. And now, will you let me know what you are thinking of doing? I told the general that service you had rendered me, and he asked me what you were going to do. I told him that as yet I did not know whether you were going to stay here or go back again." "Are you going to stay here?" "I think so, at any rate for a time. I do not know where the uncle I have told you about is at present. At any rate, while this war is going on, he can do very little trade, and can manage very well without me." "As long as you stay here, I shall stay," the Burman said. "If I went back, I should have to fight against your people, and I don't want to do that. I have no quarrel with them, and from what I see, I am not so sure as I was that we shall drive you into the sea. You have beaten us whenever you have fought, and I would rather stay with you than be obliged to fight against you. Not many men want to fight. We heard that in the villages, and that those who have not got wives and children held as hostages for them get away from the army and hide in the woods. You will be a great man now, and if you will let me stop, I will be your servant." "I will gladly keep you with me, Meinik, if you are willing to stay, and I am sure that you will be better off here than out in the woods, and a good deal safer. At any rate, stay until after your people make their next attack. You will see then how useless it is for them to fight against us. When we can attack them in their stockades, although they are 10 to 1 against us, and drive them out after a quarter of an hour's fighting, you may be sure that in the open ground, without defences, they will have no chance whatever. I hope they will soon get tired of fighting, and that the court will make peace. We did not want to fight with them. It was they who attacked us, but now that we have had all the expense of coming here, we shall go on fighting till the emperor agrees to make peace. But I don't think we shall ever go out of Rangoon again, and believe that we shall also hold the ports of Tenasserim that we have captured." "Oh, the emperor will never agree to that," Meinik said, shaking his head positively. "Then, if he does not, he will see that we shall go up the river to Ava, and in the end, if he goes on fighting, we shall capture the whole country, and rule over it, just as we have done the greater part of India." "I think that would be good for us," the man said philosophically. "It would not matter much to us to whom we paid our taxes, and you would not tax us more heavily than we are now; for as we came down you saw many villages deserted, and the land uncultivated, because the people could not pay the heavy exactions. It is not the king. He doesn't get much of it, but he gives a province or a district or a dozen villages to someone at court, and says, 'You must pay me so much, and all that you can get out of it besides is for yourself.' So they heap on the taxes, and the people are always in great poverty, and when they find that they cannot pay what is demanded and live, then they all go away to some other place, where the lord is not so harsh. I am sure that it would be a very good thing for them, Meinik. The people of India are a great deal better off under us than they were under their native rulers. There is a fixed tax, and no one is allowed to charge more, or to oppose the people in any way. But now we must be going. I said that I would be back at the place we started from in half an hour." Chapter 7: On the Staff. Captain Cook had done his best, previous to the beginning of the auction, to disarm opposition, by going about among the officers who dropped in with the intention of bidding, telling them something of Stanley's capture, adventures, and escape, and saying that the general had himself advised him to obtain an outfit by buying a considerable portion of the young officer's kit. "I have no doubt that he will put him on his staff," said Cook. "From his knowledge of the country, and the fact that he speaks the language well, he will be very useful; and as he has gone through all this from serving as a volunteer without pay, I hope you fellows won't run up the prices, except for things that you really want." His story had the desired effect, and when Captain Cook met Stanley, he was able to tell him that he had bought for him the greater portion of the kit, including everything that was absolutely necessary. "Are there any plain clothes?" Stanley asked, after thanking him warmly for the trouble he had taken. "No. Of course he left everything of that sort at Calcutta. No one in his senses would think of bringing mufti out with him, especially to such a country as this." "Then I shall have to go in uniform to the general's," Stanley said in a tone of consternation. "It seems to me that it would be an awfully impudent thing to go in staff uniform to dine with the general, when I have no right whatever to wear it." "Well, as the general advised you himself to buy the things, he cannot blame you for wearing them, and I have not the least doubt that he is going to offer you a staff appointment of some sort." "I should like it very much, as long as the war lasted, Captain Cook, but I don't think that I should care about staying in the army permanently. You see, my uncle is working up a very good business. He has been at it now 7 or 8 years, and he was saying the last time that I was with him that, as soon as these troubles were over, and trade began again, he should give me a 4th share of it, and make it a 3rd share when I got to 21. "Well, then you would be a great fool to give it up," Captain Cook said heartily. "A man who has got a good business out here would have an income as much as all the officers of a regiment together. He is his own master, and can retire when he likes, and enjoy his money in England. Still, as trade is at a standstill at present, I think it would be wise of you to accept any offer that the general might make to you. It might even be to your advantage, afterwards. To have served on Campbell's staff will be an introduction to every officers' mess in the country, and you may be sure that not only shall we hold Rangoon in the future, but there will be a good many more British stations between Assam and here than there are right now, and it would be a pull for you, even in the way of trade, to stand on a good footing everywhere." "I quite see that," Stanley agreed, "and if the general is good enough to offer me an appointment, I shall certainly take it." "Well, you have almost a right to one, Brooke. In the Peninsula, lots of men got their commissions by serving for a time as volunteers, and having been wounded at Ramoo, and being one of the few survivors of that fight, and having gone through a captivity, at no small risk of being put to death, the first time that the king was out of temper, your claim is a very strong one indeed. Besides, there is hardly a man here who speaks Burmese, and your services will be very valuable. Here are 50 rupees," he went on, handing the money to Stanley. "It is not much change out of 500, but I can assure you that you have got the things at a bargain, for you would have had to pay more than that for them in England, and I fancy most of the things are in very good condition, for Hitchcock only came out about 4 months ago. Of course, the clothes are nothing like new, but at any rate they are in a very much better state than those of anyone who came out here 3 months ago. I have ordered them all to be sent to my quarters, where, of course, you will take up your abode till something is settled about you, which will probably be this evening. In that case, you will have quarters allotted to you tomorrow." "Thank you very much. I shall devote the best portion of this afternoon to trying to get rid of as much of this stain as I can, at least off my face and hands. The rest does not matter one way or the other, and will wear off gradually, but I should like to get my face decent." "Well, you are rather an object, Stanley," he said. It would not matter so much about the colour, but all those tattoo marks are, to say the least, singular. Of course, they don't look so rum now in that native undress, but when you get your uniform on, the effect will be startling. We'll have a chat with the doctor. He may have something in his medicine chest that will at least soften them down a bit. Of course, if they were real tattoo marks, there would be nothing for it, but as they are only dye or paint of some sort, they must wear themselves out before long. I'll try anything that he'll give me. I don't care if it takes the skin off." On returning to the quarters of Captain Cook, Stanley was introduced to the other officers of the regiment, among them the doctor, to whom he had once applied for some means of taking off the dye. "Have you asked the man you brought down with you?" the surgeon said. "You say that he put it on, and he may know of something that will take it off again." "No, I have asked him, but he knows nothing. He used some of the dye stuffs of the country, but he said he never heard of anyone wanting to take the dye out of things that had been coloured." "Well, if it were only cotton or cloth," the doctor said, "I have no doubt a very strong solution of soda would take out the greater part of the dye, but the human skin won't stand boiling water. However, I should say that if you have water as hot as you can bear it, with plenty of soda and soap, it will do something for you. No doubt if you were to take a handful or two of very fine sand, it would help a great deal, but if you use that, I should not put any soda with the water, or you'll practically take all the skin off, and leave your face like a raw beefsteak, which will be worse than the stain, and indeed in so hot a sun as we have might be dangerous and bring on erysipelas. So you must be very careful, and it will be far better for you to put up with being somewhat singular in your appearance for a bit, than to lay yourself up by taking any strong measures to get rid of it." After an hour spent in vigorous washing, and aided by several rubs with very fine sand, Stanley succeeded to his great satisfaction in almost getting rid of the tattoo marks on his face. The general dye had faded a little, though not much, but what with the marks had been made was evidently of a less stable character, and yielded to soap and friction. Before he concluded the work, 2 trunks arrived, and finding that his face was now beginning to smart a good deal, he abstained for the time from further efforts, and turned to inspect his purchases with a good deal of interest. The uniforms consisted of 2 undress suits, one with trousers, the other with breeches, and high boots for riding. There was also a suit of mess jacket, waistcoat, and trousers, 3 suits of white drill, half a dozen white shirts for mess, and as many of thin flannel, and a good stock of general underclothes, a pair of thick boots, and a light pair for mess. There was also the sword, belt, and other equipments, in fact, all the necessaries he would require for a campaign. Before beginning to dress, he began to free his hair from the wax with which it had been plastered up. He had obtained from the doctor some spirits of turpentine, and with the aid of this, he found the task a less difficult one than he had expected, and the regimental barber being sent for by Captain Cook, his hair was soon shortened to the ordinary length. "You'll do very well now," the major said, as he went down into the general room. "You have certainly succeeded a great deal better than I thought you would. Of course you look very brown, but there are a good many others nearly as dark as you are, for between the rain showers the sun has tremendous power, and some of the men's faces are almost skinned, while others have browned wonderfully. I am sure that many of them are quite as dark as yours, so you will pass muster very well." Before beginning to wash and change, Stanley had given Meinik the clothes he had carried down with him, and when he went out to take a short look round before tiffin, for which the servants were already laying the cloth, he found the man, now looking like a respectable Burman, standing near the door. He walked slowly past him, but the man did not move, not recognizing him in the slightest degree in his present attire. Then Stanley turned and faced him. "So you don't know me, Meinik?" The Burman gave a start of surprise. "Certainly I did not know you, my lord," he said. "Who could have known you? Before you were a poor Burmese peasant, now you are an English lord." "Not a lord at all, Meinik. I am simply an English officer, and dressed very much the same as I was when your people knocked me on the head at Ramoo." "I know your voice," Meinik said, "but even now that I know it is you, I hardly recognize your face. Of course the tattoo marks make a great difference, but that's not all. I think it's the hair that has made most difference, Meinik. You see, it was all pulled off the brow and neck before, and it will be some time before it will grow naturally again. I had great trouble to get it to lie down, even when it was wet, and it will certainly have a tendency to stick up for a long time. The dress has made a good deal of alteration in you, too." "They are very good clothes," Meinik said. "I have never had such good ones on before. I have had money enough to buy them, but people would have asked where I got it from, and it never does to make a show of being better off than one's neighbour. A man is sure to be fleeced if he does."
So what can I do for my lord?" "Nothing at present, Meinik. I am going to lunch with the officers here, and to dine with the general and sleep here. Tomorrow, I daresay, I shall move into quarters of my own. You had better buy what you want for today in the market. I don't know whether it is well supplied, but as we saw some of your people about, there must be food to be obtained." "They gave me plenty to eat when I came in," he said, "but I will buy something for supper. No, I do not want money. I have plenty of lead left." "You had better take a couple of rupees, anyhow. There are sure to be some traders from India who have opened shops here, and they won't care to take lead in payment. You must get some fresh muslin for your turban, and you had better close it up at the top this time. It will go better with your clothes." Meinik grinned. "I shall look quite like a person of importance. I shall be taken for, at least, the headman of a large village." He took the 2 rupees and walked off toward town, while Stanley went in to luncheon. There were a good many remarks as to his altered appearance. "Do you know, Brooke," one of the young lieutenants said, "I did not feel at all sure that Cook was not humbugging us when he introduced you to us, and that you were not really a Burman who had travelled, and had somehow learned to speak English extraordinarily well." "Clothes and soap and water make a wonderful difference," Stanley laughed, "but I shall be a good many shades lighter when the rest of the dye wears off. At any rate, I can go about now without anyone staring at me." After tiffin, Stanley had to tell his story again at a very much greater length than before. "You certainly have gone through some queer adventures," the major said, when he had finished his relation, "and there is no doubt that you have had wonderful luck. In the first place, if that bullet had gone half an inch lower, you would not have been one of the 4 white survivors of that ugly business at Ramoo. Then you were lucky that they did not chop off your head, either when they first took you, or when they got you to Ava. Then again, it was lucky that Bandoola sent a special message that he wanted you kept as an interpreter for himself, and that the official in charge of you turned out to be a decent fellow, and aided you to make your escape. As to your obtaining the services of the man you brought down with you, I do not regard that as a question of luck. You saved the man's life by an act of the greatest bravery, one that not 1 man in 10 would perform, or try to perform, for the life of a total stranger. I hope that I should have made the effort, had I been in your place, but I say frankly that I am by no means sure that I should have done so. The betting was a good 20 to 1 against its being done successfully. If the brute had heard your footstep, it would have been certain death, and even when you reached him, the chances were strongly against your being able to strike a blow at the animal that would, for a moment, disable him, and so give you time to snatch up one of the guns, which might not, after all, have been loaded. It was a wonderfully gallant action, lad. You did not tell us very much about it yourself, but while you were getting the dye off, I got hold of one of the traders here, who happened to be passing, and who understood their language, and with his assistance I questioned your fellow, and got all the particulars from him. I say again, it was as plucky a thing as I have ever heard of." A few minutes later, an orderly came in with a note from the general, asking the major and Captain Cook also to dine with him that evening. Stanley was very pleased that 2 officers were going with him, as it took away the feeling of shyness he felt at the thought of presenting himself in staff uniform at the general's. Sir Archibald Campbell put him at ease at once, by the kindness with which he received him. Stanley began to apologize for his dress, but the general stopped him at once. "I intended, of course, that you should wear it, Mr. Brooke. I am sure that you would not find a dress suit in the camp. However, we will make matters all right tomorrow. Judging from what you said, as you cannot join your uncle at present, you would be willing to remain here. Your name will appear in orders, tomorrow morning, as being granted a commission in the 89th, pending the arrival of confirmation from home, which, of course, in such a case is a mere form. You will also appear in the orders as being appointed my aide-de-camp in place of Mr. Hitchcock, with extra pay as interpreter. No, do not thank me. Having served as a volunteer, taken part in a severe action, and having been wounded and imprisoned, you had almost a right to a commission. After dinner, I hope that you will give us a full account of your adventures. It was but a very slight sketch that I heard from you this morning." The general then introduced Stanley to the other members of his staff. "If you had seen him as I saw him this morning," the general said with a smile, "you certainly would not recognize him now. He was naked to the waist, and had nothing on but the usual peasant attire of a piece of black cloth reaching to his knees. I knew, of course, that the question of costume would soon be got over, but I own that I did not think that I should be able to employ him for some little time. Not only was his stain a great deal darker than it is now, but he was thickly tattooed up to the eyes, and one could hardly be sending messages by an aide-de-camp so singular in appearance. But I see that somehow he has entirely gotten rid of the tattoo marks, and his skin is now very little, if at all, darker than that of many of us, so that I shall be able to put him in harness at once." After dinner was over and cigars lighted, Stanley told his story as before, passing over lightly the manner in which he had gained the friendship of the Burman, When he had finished, however, Major Pemberton said: "With your permission, General, I will supplement the story a little. Mr. Brooke has told me somewhat more than he has told you, but I gained the whole facts from his guide's own lips." "No, Major, please," Stanley said, colouring even under his dye. "The matter is not worth telling." "You must permit us to be a judge of that, Mr. Brooke," the general said, with a smile at the young fellow's interruption of his superior officer. "I beg your pardon, Major Pemberton," Stanley stammered in some confusion. Only you would rather that I did not tell about your struggle with the leopard. I think it ought to be told, and I am pretty sure Sir Archibald Campbell will agree with me." And Major Pemberton then gave a full account of the adventure in the forest. "Thank you, Major. You were certainly quite right in telling the story, for it's one that ought to be told, and, if Mr. Brooke will forgive my saying so, it's one of those cases in which it's a mistake for a man to try to hide his light under a bushel. You see, it cannot but make a difference in the estimation in which we hold you. Most young fellows would, as you did, have joined their countrymen when threatened by a greatly superior enemy; and again, most would, if prisoners, have taken an opportunity that offered to effect their escape. Therefore, in the brief account that you gave me this morning, it appeared to me that you had behaved pluckily and shrewdly, and had very well earned a commission, especially as you have a knowledge of the language. You simply told me that you had been able to render some service to the Burman who travelled down with you, but such service might have been merely that you assisted him when he was in want, bound up a wound, or any other small matter. Now we find that you performed an act of singular courage, an act that even the oldest shikari would have reason to be proud of. Such an act, performed too for a stranger, and that stranger an enemy, would of itself give any man a title to the esteem and regard of any among whom he might be thrown, and would lead them to regard him in an entirely different light to that in which they would otherwise have held him. I think that you will all agree with me, gentlemen." "Certainly." There was a chorus of assent from the circle of officers. His narrative had, as the general said, shown that the young fellow was possessed of coolness, steadiness, and pluck; but this feat was altogether out of the common, and, as performed by a mere lad, seemed little short of marvellous. "You will, of course, have Hitchcock's quarters," the quartermaster general said to Stanley, as the party broke up. "It's a small room, but it has the advantage of being watertight, which is more than one can say of most of our quarters. It's a room in the upper story of the next house. I fancy the poor fellow's card's on the door still. The commissariat officers are in the lower part of the house, and they occupy all the other rooms upstairs, but we keep this for one of the aides de camp, so that the general could send a message at once, night or day." "Of course I shall want a horse, sir." Yes, you must have a horse. I will think over what we can do for you in that way. There's no buying one here, unless a field officer is killed or dies. Oh, by the way, Hitchcock's horses are not sold yet. They were not put up yesterday. I have no doubt that some arrangement can be made about them, and the saddlery." "Oh, that would be excellent, sir. As I told the general this morning, I have some rubies and other stones. I have no idea what they are worth. They were given me by those men I was with in the forest. They said that they were very difficult to dispose of, as the mines are monopoly of the government. So when my man Meinik proposed it, they acceded at once to his request, and handed a number of them over to me. I have not even looked at them. There may be someone here who could tell me what they are worth." "Yes, I have no doubt some of these Parsee merchants, who have lately set up stores, could tell you. I should only take down 2 or 3 stones to them, if I were you. If they are really valuable, you might be robbed of them. But I am rather afraid that you will not find that they are so. Brigand fellows will hardly have been likely to give you anything very valuable." "Oh, I don't think they looked at them themselves. They were the proceeds of one day's attack on a number of merchants. They found them concealed on the merchants, and they were so well established, satisfied with the loot they got, in merchandise that they could dispose of, that I doubt whether they even opened the little packages of what they considered the most dangerous goods to keep, for if they were captured and gems found upon them, it would be sufficient to condemn them at once." "Do you speak Hindustani? If not, I will send one of the clerks with you." "Yes, sir, and 3 or 4 other of the Indian languages." "Ah, then you can manage for yourself. When you have seen one of these Parsees, come round to my office. I will have seen the paymaster by that time, and have talked over with him how we can arrange about the horses. I should think that the best way would be to have a committee of 3 officers to value them, and the saddlery, and then you might authorize him to receive your extra pay as interpreter, and to place it to Hitchcock's account. You will find your own staff pay more than ample here, as there are no expenses whatever, except your share of the mess." "Thank you very much indeed, Colonel." In the morning, Stanley took one of the little parcels from the bag and opened it. It contained 30 stones, of which 20 were rubies, 6 sapphires, and 4 emeralds. They seemed to him of a good size, but as they were in the rough state, he had no idea what size they would be when cut. There were 3 of the Parsee merchants. The first he went to said at once that he did not deal in gems. The next he called on examined the stones carefully. "It is impossible to say for certain," he said, "how much they are worth until they are cut, for there may be flaws in them that cannot be detected. Now, if I were to buy them like this, I could not give more than 100 rupees each. If they are all flawless, they would be worth much more, but it would be a pure speculation, and I will not go beyond that sum." Stanley then visited the third store. The trader here inspected them a little more carefully than the last had done, examined them with a magnifying glass, held them up to the light. Then he weighed each stone, and jotted down some figures. At last he said, "The stones are worth 5,000 rupees. If they are flawless, they would be worth double that. I will give you 5,000 myself, or if you like, I will send them to a friend of mine at Madras. He is one of the best judges of gems in India. He will say what he will give for them, and you shall pay me 5% commission. He is an honest trader, and you can ask any of the officers from Madras." "I will accept that offer, if you will make me an advance of 1,500 rupees upon them, and will pay you at the rate of 10% per annum interest, till you receive the money for them." The Parsee again took the gems, and examined them carefully. "Do you agree to take the jeweller's offer, whatever it is?" "Yes, that is to say, if it is over the 5,000. If it is under the 5,000, I will sell them to you at that sum." "I agree to that," the man said. "But do not fear. If the 2 largest stones are without a flaw, they alone are worth 5,000. "Well, let us draw up an agreement at once," Stanley said. And accordingly the terms were drawn up in Hindustani, and were signed by both parties. The Parsee then went to a safe, unlocked it, and counted out the rupees to the value of £150. These he placed in a bag, and handed them to Stanley, who, delighted at the sum that he had obtained for but a small portion of the gems, went to the Quartermaster General's office. "We have just finished our business," Colonel Adair said as he entered. "Major Moultrie, the paymaster, Colonel Wall, and I have examined the horses. I know that Hitchcock paid £60 apiece for them at Calcutta. They are both Arabs, and good ones, and were not dear at the money. Our opinion is that, if they were put up for auction here, they would fetch £40 apiece, and that the saddle and bridle, holsters, and accoutrements would fetch another £20. There are also a pair of well-finished pistols in the holsters. They were overlooked, or they would have been put up in the sale yesterday. They value them at £8 the brace, in all £108. Will that suit you? The Major will, as I propose, stop the money from your pay as a first-class interpreter, that is 250 rupees a month, so that in 4 months and a half you will have cleared it all off." "I am very much obliged to you, Colonel, but I have just received an advance of 1,500 rupees on some of my gems, which the Parsee is going to send to a jeweller of the name of Burragi at Madras." "Well, I congratulate you, for I hardly hoped that they would turn out to be worth so much. Burragi is a first-rate man, and you can rely upon getting a fair price from him. Well, that obviates all difficulty. By the way, I should recommend you get a light bedstead and bed, and a couple of blankets at one of the Parsee stores. Of course, you did not think of it yesterday, or you might have bought Hitchcock's. However, I noticed in one of the Parsee's shops a number of light bamboo bedsteads, which are the coolest and best in a climate like this. If you lay a couple of blankets on the bamboos, you will find that you don't want a mattress." "Oh, I don't know what my duties are, sir, or whether the general will be wanting me." "He will not want you today. Anyhow, he will know that you will be making your arrangements and moving into your quarters. By the way, Hitchcock brought a syce with him. You must have a man for your horses, and I have no doubt he will be glad to stay on with you." 2 hours later, Stanley was installed in his quarters, a room some 12 feet long by 8 wide. A bed stood in one corner. There was a table for writing on, 2 light bamboo chairs, and an Indian lounging chair. In the corner was a small bamboo table, on which was a large brass basin, while a great earthenware jar for water stood beside it, and a piece of Indian matting covered the floor. He learned that the staff messed together in a large room in the next house, and that he would there get a cup of coffee and a biscuit at 6 in the morning, breakfast at 8:30, lunch and dinner, so that he would not have to do any cooking whatever for himself. He had given Meinik a small sum to lay out in cooking pots and necessities for his own use. The syce had gladly entered his employ. Stanley had inspected the horses, which, although light to the eye, would be well capable of bearing his weight through a long day's work. They were picketed, with those of the general and staff, in a line behind the house devoted to the headquarters. After lunch he went into the general's, and reported himself as ready for duty. "I shall not want you this afternoon, Mr. Brooke. Here is a plan showing the position of the different corps. You had better get it by heart. When it gets cooler this afternoon, I should advise you to ride out and examine the position and the roads, so that even at night you can, if necessary, carry a message to any of the regiments. The Burmese are constantly creeping up and stabbing our sentries, and sometimes they attack in considerable force. When anything like heavy firing begins, it will be your duty to find out at once what is going on, and bring me word, as it may be necessary to send up reinforcements. In the morning it will be your duty to examine any prisoners who have been taken during the night, and also natives who have made their way into the town, in order to ascertain whether any date has been fixed for the next attack, and what forces are likely to take part in it. You can make your man useful at this work. By the way, I will tell Colonel Adair to put him down on the list of the quartermaster's native followers. He need not do anything else but this. But it is likely that the natives will speak more freely to him than they would to a white officer, and he may as well be earning 30 rupees a month and drawing rations as hanging about all day doing nothing." Thanking the general, Stanley took the plan and, going back to his quarters, studied it attentively. He told Meinik of the arrangement that had been made for him, with which the Burman was much pleased. 30 rupees a month seemed a large sum to him, and he was glad that he should not be costing Stanley money for his food. 3 hours later, one of his horses was brought round, and he started on his ride through the camp. There were 2 roads leading through the town to the great pagoda. Both were thickly bordered by religious houses and pagodas, the latter, for the most part, being in a state of dilapidation. Houses and pagodas alike had been turned into quarters for the troops, and had been invaluable during the wet season. The terrace of the great pagoda was occupied by the 89th Regiment and the Madras Artillery. This was the most advanced position, and was the key to the defence. Leaving his horse in charge of his sais at the foot of the pagoda hill, Stanley went up to the terrace and soon entered into conversation with some of the British officers, who at once recognized him as having been, that morning, put in orders as the general's aide-de-camp. As he was unknown to everyone, and no ship had come in for some days, there was naturally much curiosity felt as to who the stranger was who had been appointed to a commission, and to the coveted post of aide-de-camp, all in one day. After chatting for 2 or 3 minutes, they conducted Stanley to the colonel's quarters, a small building at the foot of the pagoda. "This is Mr. Brooke, Colonel, the gentleman who was gazetted to us this morning." "I am glad to see you, Mr. Brooke, but I should be more glad still if you had been coming to join, for we have lost several officers from sickness, and there are others unfit for duty. When did you arrive?" "I arrived only yesterday morning, sir. I came here in disguise, having made my way down from Ava." "Oh, indeed. We heard a report that a white man had arrived, in disguise, at the lines of the 45th Native Infantry, but we have had no particulars beyond that." "I was captured at Ramoo, sir, while I was acting as an officer of the native levy. Fortunately, I was stunned by the graze of a musket ball, and, being supposed dead, was not killed, as were all the other officers who fell into the hands of the Burmese. Their fury had abated by the time I came to myself, and I was carried up to Ava with some 20 sepoy prisoners. After a time I made my escape from prison, and took to the forest, where I remained some weeks, till the search for me had abated somewhat. Then I made my way down the country, for the most part in a fishing boat, journeying only at night, and so succeeded in getting in here. Fortunately, I speak the Mug dialect, which is very closely akin to the Burmese." "Well," the colonel said, "I hope that you will consider the regiment your home, though I suppose that, until the campaign is at an end, you will only be able to pay us an occasional visit. You are lucky in getting the staff appointment. No doubt your being able to talk Burmese had a good deal to do with it." "Everything, I think, sir. The general had no one on his staff who could speak the language, and unless he happened to have with him one of the very few men here who can do so, often had to wait some time before a prisoner could be questioned." He remained chatting for half an hour, and then rode back to the town, taking the other road, which he had before traversed.